I think we should be okay now. I think. Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me better? I just realized that I didn't have my phone connected to my mixer. Oh good, I'm back. Okay. We can jump into chapter 2, which is called Heaven for Cars. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I appreciate it. I just realized that my mixer wasn't connected to my phone, so you were just getting audio from my phone, not through my mic to my mixer to my phone. Thank you, Lazy Bork. I appreciate it. Okay, this is chapter 2, Heaven for Cars. With Hammersmith Bridge just ahead of him, Alex left the river and swung his bike through the lights and down the hill towards Brooklyn School. The bike was a Condor Junior road racer, a custom built for him on his 12th birthday. It was a teenager's bike, with a cut-down Reynolds 531 frame, but the wheels were full-size, so he could ride at speed with hardly any rolling resistance. I'm gonna pretend like I knew what that meant. I don't know European bikes, so I don't know. He spun past the delivery van and passed through the school gates. He would be sorry when he grew out of the bike. For 2 years now, it had almost been a part of him. He double-locked it in the shed and went into the yard. Brooklyn was a modern school, all red brick, and to Alex's eye, rather ugly. He could have gone to any of the exclusive private schools around Chelsea, but Ian Ryder had decided to send him here. He had said it would be more of a challenge. The first period of the day was algebra, and when Alex came into the classroom, the teacher, Mr. Donovan, was already chalking up a complicated equation on the board. It was hot in the room, the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, put in by architects who should have known better. As Alex took his place near the back, he wondered how he was going to get through the lesson. How could he possibly think about algebra when there were so many other questions churning through his mind? The gun at the funeral. The way Blunt had looked at him, the van that said Stryker and Son written on the side, the empty office, and the biggest mystery of all, the one detail that refused to go away. The seatbelt. Ian Ryder hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. But of course he had. Ian Ryder had never been one to give lectures. He'd always said Alex should make up his own mind about things, but he'd had this thing about seatbelts. The more Alex thought about it, the less he believed it. A collision in the middle of the city. He suddenly wished that he could see the car. At least the wreckage would tell him that the accident had really happened. That Ian Ryder had really died that way. Alex? Alex looked up and realized that everyone was staring at him. Mr. Donovan had just asked him something. He quickly scanned the chalkboard, taking in the figures. "Yes, sir," he said. "X equals 7 and Y is 15. The math teacher sighed. "Yes, Alex, you're absolutely right. But actually, I was just asking you to open the window." Somehow, he managed to get through the rest of the day, but by the time the final bell rang, his mind was made up. While everyone else streamed out, he made his way to the secretary's office and borrowed a copy of the Yellow Pages. "What you looking for?" the secretary asked. Mrs. Bedfordshire had always had a soft spot for Alex. "Auto junkyards." Alex flicked through the pages. If a car got smashed up near Old Street, they'd take it somewhere near, wouldn't they? "I suppose so." "Here." Alex had found the yards listed under auto wreckers, but there were dozens of them fighting for attention over 4 pages. "Is this for a school project?" the secretary asked. She knew Alex had lost a relative, but not how. "Sort of." Alex was reading the addresses, but they told him nothing. "This one's quite near Old Street." Mrs. Bedfordshire pointed at the corner of the page. "Wait!" Alex tugged the book towards him and looked at the entry underneath the one the secretary had chosen. J.B. Stryker Auto Wreckers. Heaven for Cars. Call us today. That's in Vauxhall, Mrs. Bedfordshire said. Not too far from here. I know. But Alex had recognized the name J.B. Stryker. He'd thought back to the van he'd seen outside his house on the day of the funeral. Stryker and Son. Of course. It might just be a coincidence, but it was still somewhere to start. He closed the book. I'll see you, Mrs. Bedfordshire. Be careful. The secretary watched Alex leave, wondering why she'd said that. Maybe it was his eyes, dark and serious. There was something dangerous there. I like how his secretary is like, this 14-year-old scares me. Then the telephone rang and she forgot him and went back to work. J.B. Stryker's was a square of wasteland behind the railway tracks running out of Waterloo Station. The area was enclosed by a high brick wall topped with broken glass and razor wire. 2 wooden gates hung open from either side of the road, and Alex could see a shed with a security window beyond it and the tottering piles of dead, broken cars. Anything of value had been stripped away and only the rusting carcasses remained, heaped one on top of the other, waiting to be fed to the crusher. There was a guard sitting at the shed reading a newspaper. In the distance, a bulldozer coughed to life and then roared down a battered Ford Taurus, its metal claws smashing through the window to scoop the vehicle up and carry it away. A telephone rang somewhere in the shed, and the guard turned around to answer it. That was enough for Alex. Holding his bike and wheeling it along beside him, he sprinted through the gates, and he found himself surrounded by dirt and debris. The smell of diesel was thick in the air, and the roar of the engine was deafening. Alex watched as a crane swooped down on one of the cars, seized it in its metal grip, and dropped it into a crusher. For a moment, the car rested on a pair of shelves. Then, the shelves lifted up, toppling the car over and down into a trough. The operator, sitting in a glass cabin at one end of the crusher, pressed a button and there was a great belch of black smoke. The shelves closed in on the car like a monster insect folding its giant wings. There was a grinding sound as the car was crushed until it was no bigger than a rolled-up carpet. Then the operator threw a gear and the car was squeezed out, metallic toothpaste being chopped away by a hidden blade. The slices tumbled to the ground. Leaving his bike propped against the wall, Alex ran further into the yard, crouching down behind the wrecks. With the din of the machines, there was no chance that anyone could hear him, but he was still afraid of being seen. He stopped to catch his breath, drawing a grimy hand across his face. His eyes were watering from the diesel fumes, and the air was as filthy as the ground beneath him. He was beginning to regret coming, but then he saw it. His uncle's BMW was parked a few yards away, separated from the other cars. At first glance, it looked absolutely fine, the metallic silver bodywork not even scratched. Certainly there was no way this car could have been involved in a fatal collision with a truck or anything else. But it was definitely his uncle's car. Alex recognized the license plate. He hurried closer, and that was when he saw that the car was damaged after all. The windshield had been smashed, along with all the windows on the driver's side. Alex made his way around to the other side of the car and froze. Ian Ryder hadn't died in any accident. What had killed him was plain to see, even to someone who'd never seen such a thing before. A spray of bullets had caught the car full on the driver's side, shattering the front tire, smashing the windshield and side windows, and punching into the side panels. Alex ran his fingers over the holes. The metal felt cold against his flesh. He opened the door and looked inside. The front seats, pale gray leather, were strewn with fragments of broken glass and stained with patches of dark brown. He didn't need to ask what that stain was. He could see everything. The flash of a machine gun, the bullets ripping into the car, Ian Ryder jerking in the driver's seat. But why? Why kill a bank manager? Why had his murder been covered up? It was the police who had delivered the news that night, so they must have been part of it. Had they lied deliberately? None of it made any sense. You should have gotten rid of it 2 days ago. Do it now. The machines must have stopped for a moment, and if there hadn't been a sudden lull, Alex would never have heard the men coming. Quickly, he looked across the steering wheel to the other side, and there were 2 of them, both dressed in loose-fitting overalls. Alex had seen him before, at the funeral. One of them was the driver. The man had a gun. He was sure of it. Whoever they were only a few paces away from the car, talking in low voices. Another few steps and they would be there. Without thinking, Alex threw himself into the only hiding place available, inside the car itself. Using his foot, he hooked the door and closed it, and at the same time he became aware that the machines had started again and he could no longer hear the men. He didn't dare look up. A shadow fell across the window as the 2 men passed, but then they were gone, and he was safe. The Mad Druid, thank you for the hydrate. I will go ahead and do that right now. How are we doing, chat? How we feeling? Okay. Thank you for the hydrate. Where was I? Oh, yes. But then they were gone, and he was safe. And then something hit the BMW with such force that Alex cried out, his whole body caught in a massive shockwave that tore him away from the steering wheel and threw him helplessly into the back. My lizard is freaking out, y'all. The roof buckled, and 3 huge metal fingers tore through the skin of the car like a fork through an eggshell, trailing dust and sunlight. One of the fingers grazed the side of his head. Any closer and it would have cracked his skull. Alex yelled as blood trickled over his eye. He tried to move, then was jerked back a second time as the car was yanked off the ground and tilted high up into the air. He couldn't see, he couldn't move, but his stomach lurched as the car swung in an arc, the metal grinding and the light spinning. The BMW had been picked up by the crane. It was going to be put inside the crusher, with himself inside. He tried to raise himself up, to wave through the windows, but the claw of the crane had already flattened the roof, pinning his leg, perhaps even breaking it. He could feel nothing. He lifted a hand and managed to pound on the back window, but he couldn't break the glass. Even if the workmen were staring at the BMW, they would never see anything moving inside. His short flight across the junkyard ended with a bone-shattering crash as the crane deposited the car on the iron shelves of the crusher. Alex tried to fight both, back his sickness and despair, and think of what to do. Any moment now, the operator would send the car tipping into the coffin-shaped trough. The machine was a Lefford shear, a slow-motion guillotine. At the press of a button, the 2 wings would close on the car with a joint pressure of 500 tons. The car with Alex inside it would be crushed beyond recognition, and the broken metal and flesh would then be chopped into sections. Nobody would ever know what had happened. He tried with all his strength to free himself, but the roof was too low. His leg was trapped. Then his whole world tilted, and he felt himself falling into darkness. The shelves had lifted. The BMW slid to one side and fell a few yards into the trough. Alex felt the metalwork collapsing around him. The back window exploded and glass showered around his head, dust and diesel fumes punching into his nose and eyes. There was hardly any daylight now, but looking out the back he could see the huge steel head of the piston that would push what was left of the car through the exit hole on the other side. The engine tone of the Leffert shear changed as it prepared for the final act. The metal wings shuddered, and in a few seconds' time, two of them would meet, crumpling the BMW like a paper bag. Alex pulled with all his strength and was astonished when his leg came free. It took him perhaps a second, one precious second, to work out what had happened. When the car had fallen into the trough, it had landed on its side. The roof had buckled again, just enough to free him. His hand scrabbled for the door, but of course that was useless. The doors were too bent. They would never open. The back window. With the glass gone, he could crawl through the frame, but only if he moved fast. The wings began to move, and the BMW screamed as two walls of solid steel relentlessly crushed it. More glass shattered. One of the wheel axles snapped with the sound of a thunderbolt. Darkness began to close in. Alex grabbed hold of what was left of the back seat. Ahead of him, he could see a single triangle of light, shrinking faster and faster. He could feel the weight of the two walls pressing down on him. The car was no longer a car, but the fist of some hideous monster snatching at the insect that Alex had become. With all his strength, he surged forward. His shoulders passed through the triangle out into the light, and next came his legs, but at the last moment, his shoe caught on a piece of jagged metal. He jerked, and the shoe was pulled off, falling back into the car. Alex heard the sound of the leather being squashed, and finally, clinging to the black, oily surface of the observation platform at the back of the crusher, he dragged himself clear and managed to stand up. He found himself face to face with a man so fat that he could barely fit into the cabin of the crusher. The man's stomach was pressed against the glass, his shoulders squeezed into the corners. A cigarette dangled on his lower lip as his mouth fell open and his eyes stared. What he saw was a boy in the rags of what had once been a school uniform. A whole sleeve had been torn off of his arm, streaked with blood and oil, and it hung limply by his side. But by the time the operator had taken all of this in, come to his senses, and turned the machine off, the boy was gone. Alex clambered down the side of the crusher, landing on the one foot that still had a shoe. He was aware now of the pieces of jagged metal lying everywhere. If he wasn't careful, he would cut open the other foot. His bicycle was where he'd left it, leaning against the wall, and gingerly, half hopping, he made for it. Behind him, he heard the sound of the cabin of the crusher door. Behind him, he heard the cabin of the crusher open, and a man's voice called out, raising the alarm. At the same time, a second man ran forward, stopping between Alex and his bike. It was the driver, the man he had seen at the funeral. His eyes... No. Oh my goodness, excuse me, apparently I can't read. His face, twisted into a hostile frown, was curiously ugly. Greasy hair, watery eyes, pale, lifeless skin. "What do you think?" he began. His hand slid into his jacket. Alex remembered the gun, and instantly, without even thinking, he swung into action. He had started learning karate when he was 6 years old. One afternoon, with no explanation, Ian Ryder had taken him to a local club for his first lesson, and he'd been going there once a week ever since. Over the years, he had passed through various Q student grades, but it was only the year before that he had become a first-grade black belt. When he'd arrived at Brooklyn School, his gentle looks and accent had quickly brought him to the attention of the school bullies, 3 hulking 16-year-olds. They had cornered him once behind the bike shed. The encounter lasted less than a minute, and the next day one of the bullies had left Brooklyn, and the other two had never given him any trouble again. Now, Alex brought up one leg, twisted his body, and lashed out. The back kick is said to be one of the most lethal in karate. His foot powered into the man's abdomen with such force that he didn't even have time to cry out. His eyes bulged and his mouth opened in surprise. Then, With his hand still halfway into his jacket, he crumpled to the ground. Alex jumped over him and snatched up his bike. He swung himself onto it. In the distance, a third man was running towards him. He heard the single word, "Stop!" called out. There was a crack, and a bullet whipped past. Alex gripped the handlebars and pedaled as hard as he could. The bike shot forward, over the rubble, and out through the gates. He took one look over his shoulder. Nobody had followed him. With one shoe on and one shoe off, his clothes in rags and his body streaked with oil, Alex knew he must have looked a strange sight. But then he thought back to his last seconds inside the crusher and sighed with relief. Could be a lot worse. And that's the end of chapter 2. Let's see. I'm doing a self-assessment for class. So much fun. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna get some more water here for a second. What are we thinking of the first couple of chapters here? Thank you for the hydrate stat. Okay. Oh, we gotta stretch. We gotta stretch, redeemed. We gotta stretch. A stretch. Oh. That's nice. Are y'all stretching and having water? Don't forget to take your meds if you need to. Drink some water. Get some food or a snack or something. My lizard's wigging out. Norbert, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm gonna grab her real quick. Give me 1 second. You wanna come say hi? This is my honey. Her name is Norbert. She's a grumpy girl, but she's the best. I love her lots. You're welcome for the reminder. Sometimes we need it. Sometimes we just need a reminder. Okay. Yes, Norbert. My little baby dragon. My dragon. Okay. Let me put these back in. I will do that. Okay. I am doing the opposite of a stretch and drinking straight up sand. No! At least drink water, sexy stunt double. At least do that. Okay, this is chapter 3. Royal and General. The bank called the following day. This is John Crowley. Do you remember me? Personnel manager at the Royal and General. We were wondering if you could come in. Come in? Alex was half-dressed, already late for school. This afternoon, we found some papers of your uncle's and we need to talk to you about your own position. Was there something faintly threatening in that man's voice? What time this afternoon? Alex asked. Could you manage 4:30? We're on Liverpool Street. We can send a cab. I'll be there, Alex said, and I'll take the tube. He hung up. Who was that? Jack called out from the kitchen. She was cooking breakfast for the two of them, although how long she would remain with Alex was a growing worry. Her wages hadn't been paid. She had only her own money to buy food and pay for the running of the house. Worse still, her visa was about to expire. Soon, she wouldn't even be allowed to stay in the country. That was the bank. Alex came into the room wearing a spare uniform. He hadn't told her what had happened in the junkyard, and Jack had enough on her mind. I'm going there this afternoon, he said. Do you want me to come? No, I'll be fine. He came out of the Liverpool Street tube station just after 4:15 in the afternoon, still wearing his school uniform. Dark blue jacket, gray trousers, striped tie. He found the bank easily enough. The Royal in general occupied a tall, antique-looking building with a Union Jack fluttering from a pole about 15 floors up. There was a brass plaque with the name next to the main door and a security camera swiveling slowly over the pavement. Alex stopped in front of it. For a moment, he wondered if he was making a mistake. Going in. If the bank had been responsible in some way for Ian Ryder's death, it was always possible that they had asked him here to arrange his own. But why would anyone from the bank want to kill him? He didn't even have an account here. He went inside. And in an office on the 17th floor, the image of a television monitor flickered and changed as street camera number 1 smoothly cut across the reception, cameras 2 and 3. Everything was dark and shadowy inside. The man sitting behind a desk saw Alex come in and pressed a button. Camera number 2 zoomed in until Alex's face filled the screen. "So he came," the chairman of the bank muttered. "That's the boy." The speaker was a middle-aged woman. She had a strange potato-shaped head, and her black hair looked as if it had been cut using a pair of blunt scissors and an upturned bowl. Her eyes were almost as black as her hair. She was dressed in a severe gray suit and was sucking a peppermint. "Are you sure about this, Alan?" she asked. Alan Blunt nodded. "Oh, yes, quite sure. You know what to do?" The last question was addressed to his driver, who was across the room. The driver was standing uncomfortably, slightly hunched over. His face was chalky white, and he had been that way ever since he tried to stop Alex in the auto junkyard. "Yes, sir," he said. "Then do it," Blunt said. His eyes never left the screen. In the lobby, Alex had asked for John Crowley and was sitting on a leather sofa, vaguely wondering why so few people were going in and out. The reception area was quiet and claustrophobic with a brown marble floor, 3 elevators to one side, and above the desk, a row of clocks showing the time in every major world city. But it could have been the entrance to anywhere. A hospital, a concert hall, even a cruise liner. The place had no identity of its own. One of the elevator doors slid open, and Crowley appeared in the same suit he'd worn at the funeral, but with a different tie. "I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting, Alex," he said. "Have you come straight from school?" Alex stood up, but said nothing, allowing his uniform to answer the man's question. "Let's go up to my office," Crowley said. He gestured. "We'll take the elevator." Alex didn't notice the 4th camera inside the elevator, but then it was concealed on the other side of a one-way mirror that covered the back wall. Nor did he see the thermal intensifier next to the camera, but the second machine both looked at him and through him as he stood there, turning him into a pulsating mass of different colors, none of which translated into the cold steel of a hidden gun or knife. In less than the time it took Alex to blink, the machine had passed its information down to a computer that had instantly evaluated and then sent its own signal back to the circuits that controlled the elevator. "It's okay, he's unarmed. Continue to the 15th floor." "Here we are!" Crowley smiled and ushered Alex out into a long corridor with an uncarpeted wooden floor and modern lighting. A series of doors were punctuated by brightly colored abstract paintings. "My office is just along here." Crowley pointed to the way. They had passed 3 doors, and Alex stopped. Each door had a nameplate, and this one he knew. 1504. Alex Ryder. No, Ian Ryder. Ian Ryder. White letters on black plastic. Crowley nodded slowly. "Yes, this was where your uncle worked. He will be missed much. Can I go inside? Alex asked. Crowley seemed surprised. Why would you want to do that? I'd be interested to see where he worked. I'm sorry, Crowley sighed. The door will have been locked and I don't have the key. Another time, perhaps. He gestured again, used his hands like a magician as if he were about to produce a fan of cards. I have the office next door, just here. They went into 1505. It was a large square room with 3 windows looking out over the station. There was a flutter of red and blue outside, and Alex remembered the flag he'd seen. The flagpole was right next to the office. Inside, there was a desk and a chair, a couple of sofas, in the corner, a fridge, and on the wall a couple of prints. A boring executive's office, perfect for a boring executive. Please, Alex, sit down, Crowley said. He went over to the fridge. Can I get you a drink? Do you have a Coke? Yes! Crowley opened a can and filled a glass, and handed it to Alex. Ice? No thanks. Alex took a sip. It wasn't Coke. It wasn't even Pepsi. He recognized the oversweet, slightly coiling taste of supermarket cola and wished he'd asked for water. So, what did you want to talk to me about? Your uncle's will. The phone rang, and with another hand sign, this one for "excuse me," Crowley answered it. He spoke for a few minutes and then hung up. I'm very sorry, Alex. I have to go down to the lobby. Do you mind? Go ahead. Alex settled himself on the sofa. I'll be about 5 minutes. And with a final nod of apology, Crowley left. Alex waited a few seconds. Then he poured the cola into a potted plant and stood up. He went over to the door and back into the corridor. At the far end, a woman carrying a bunch of papers appeared and disappeared through a door. There was no sign of Crowley. Quickly, Alex moved back to the door of 504 and tried the handle, but Crowley had been telling the truth. It was locked. Alex went back into Crowley's office. He would have given anything just to spend a few minutes alone in Ian Ryder's office. Somebody thought the dead man's work was important enough to keep hidden from him. They had broken into his house and cleaned out everything they'd found in the office there. Perhaps the office next door might tell him why. What exactly was Ian Ryder involved in? And what was the reason that he had been killed? No, that's not the word. The flag fluttered again, and seeing it, Alex went over to the window. The pole jutted out of the building exactly between rooms 1504 and 1505. If he could somehow reach it, he should be able to jump onto the ledge that ran along the side of the building outside of room 1504. Of course, he was 15 floors up. If he jumped and missed, it would be a couple 100 feet to fall. It was a stupid idea. It wasn't worth thinking about. Alex opened the window and climbed out. It was better not to think about it at all. He would just do it. After all, if this was the ground floor, or the jungle gym in the schoolyard, it would be child's play. It was only the sheer brick wall stretching down to the pavement, the cars and buses moving like they were toys so far below, and the blast of the wind against his face that made it terrifying. Don't think about it. Just do it. Alex lowered himself onto the ledge outside of Crowley's office. His hands were behind him, clutching onto the windowsill. He took a deep breath and jumped. A camera in the office across the road caught Alex as he launched himself into space. 2 floors above, Alan Blunt was still sitting in front of the screen. He chuckled. It was a humorless sound. I told you, he said. The boy's quite extraordinary. The boy's quite mad, the woman retorted. Well, maybe that's what we need. You're just going to sit there and watch him kill himself? I'm going to sit here and hope that he survives. Alex had miscalculated the jump. He had missed the flagpole by an inch and would have plunged down onto the pavement if his hands hadn't caught hold of the Union Jack itself. He was hanging now, with his feet in midair. Slowly, with huge effort, he pulled himself up, fingers hooking into the material. Somehow, he managed to climb back up onto the pole. He still didn't look down. He just hoped that no passerby looked up. It was easier after that. He squatted on the pole and threw himself sideways and across the ledge, outside of Ian Ryder's office. He had to be careful. Too far to the left and he would crash into the side of the building, but too far the other way and he would fall. In fact, he landed perfectly, grabbing hold of the ledge with both hands and then pulling himself up until he was level with the window. But it was only now that he wondered if the window would be locked. If so, he'd just have to go back. It wasn't. Alex slid the window open and hoisted himself into the second office, which, in many ways, was a carbon copy of the first. It had the same furniture, the same carpet, even a similar painting on the wall. He went over to the desk and sat down. The first thing he saw was a photograph of himself, taken the summer before on the Caribbean island of Guadalupe, where he had gone diving. There was a second picture, tucked into the corner of a frame. It was Alex, aged 5 or 6. He was surprised and a little saddened by the photographs. Ian Ryder had been more sentimental than he had pretended. Alex glanced at his watch. About 3 minutes had passed since Crowley had left the office, and he had said that he would be back in 5. If he was going to find anything here, he had to find it quickly. He pulled open a drawer in the desk, and it contained 4 or 5 thick files. Alex took them and opened them. He saw at once that they had nothing to do with banking. The first was marked, "Nerve Poisons, New Methods of Concealment and Dissemination." Alex put it aside and looked at the second. "Assassinations, 4 case studies." Growing ever more puzzled, he quickly flicked through the rest of the files, which covered counterterrorism, movement of uranium across Europe, and interrogation techniques. The last file was simply labeled Stormbreaker. Alex was about to read it when the door suddenly opened, and 2 men walked in. One of them was Crowley, and the other was the driver from the junkyard. Alex knew that there was no point trying to explain what he was doing. He was sitting behind the desk with the Stormbreaker file in his hands, but at the same time he realized that the 2 men weren't surprised to see him there. From the way they'd come into the room, they had expected to find him. "This isn't a bank," Alex said. "Who are you? Was my uncle working for you? Did you kill him?" "So many questions," Crowley muttered, "but I'm afraid we're not authorized to give you the answers." The second man lifted his hand, and Alex saw that he was holding a gun. He stood up behind the desk, holding the file as if to protect himself. "No," he began. The man fired. There was no explosion. The gun spat at Alex, and he felt something slam into his heart. His hand opened, and the file tumbled to the ground. Then, his legs buckled, the room twisted, and he fell back into nothing. No, terrible gamer, you need to be hydrated. That was the end of chapter 3. I think we might have time for one more chapter, and then I'll probably send you guys on a raid. But first, water. How are we liking it, chat? Thank you all for being here. I was so nervous because this was my first reading stream, and I wasn't as prepared as I would have liked to have been, but Very relaxing. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Thank you for being here. Should we just jump into chapter 4, Norbert? Should we just do it? Should we just do it? We're gonna do it. Okay. Chapter 4. So what do you say? Thank you, Terrible Gamer. I appreciate it. Alex opened his eyes. So he was still alive. That was a nice surprise. He was lying on a bed in a large, comfortable room. The bed was modern, but the room was old, with beams running across the ceiling, a stone fireplace, and narrow windows, and an ornate wooden frame. He'd seen rooms like this in books when he was studying Shakespeare. He would have said the building was Elizabethan. It had to be somewhere in the country. There was no sound of traffic, and outside he could see trees. Someone had undressed him. His school uniform was gone, and instead he was wearing loose pajamas, silk from the feel of them. From the light outside, he would have guessed it was mid-morning. He found his watch lying on the table beside the bed, and he reached out for it. The time was 12 o'clock. It had been around 4:30 when he'd been shot with what must have been a drugged dart. He'd lost a whole night and half a day. There was a bathroom leading off from the bedroom. Bright white tiles and a huge shower behind a cylinder of glass and chrome. Alex stripped off the pajamas and stood for 5 minutes under a jet of steaming water. He felt better after that. He went back into the room and opened the closet. Someone had been to his house in Chelsea. All his clothes were there, neatly hung up. He wondered what Crowley had told Jack. Presumably, he would have made up some story to explain Alex's sudden disappearance. He took out a pair of Gap combat trousers, a Nike sweatshirt and sneakers, and he got dressed, then sat down on the bed and waited. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock and the door opened. A young Asian woman in a nurse's uniform came in, beaming. "Oh, you're awake. And dressed. How are you feeling? Not too groggy, I hope. Please come this way. Mr. Blunt is expecting you for lunch." Alex hadn't spoken a word to her. He followed her out of the room, along a corridor, and down a flight of stairs. The house was indeed Elizabethan, with wooden panels along the corridors, ornate chandeliers, and oil paintings of old, bearded men in tunics and ruffs. The stairs led down into a tall, galleried room with a rug spread out over the flagstones and a fireplace big enough to park a car in. A long, polished wooden table had been set for 3. Alan Blunt and a dark, rather masculine woman sucking a peppermint were already sitting down. Mrs. Blunt? "Alex." Blunt smiled briefly, as if it was something he didn't enjoy doing. "It's good of you to join us." Alex sat down. "You didn't give me much of a choice." "Yes, I don't know what Crowley was thinking, having you shot like that, but I suppose it was the easiest way. May I introduce my colleague, Mrs. Jones?" The woman nodded at Alex. Her eyes seemed to examine him minutely, but she said nothing. "Who are you?" Alex asked. "What do you want with me?" "I'm sure you have a great many questions, but first, let's eat." "I am Baby Shaq. Hello, welcome on in. We're reading a book." Yes, let's eat." Blunt must have pressed a hidden button, or else he was being overheard. For at that precise moment, a door opened and a waiter in white jacket and black trousers appeared, carrying 3 plates. "I hope you like meat," Blunt continued. "Today it's carré d'agneau." "You mean roast lamb?" "The chef is French." Alex waited until the food had been served. Blunt and Mrs. Jones drank red wine. He stuck to water. Finally, Blunt began. "I'm sure you've gathered," he said, "the Royal in general is not a bank. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's nothing more than a cover. And it follows, of course, that your uncle had nothing to do with banking. He worked for me. My name, as I told you at the funeral, is Blunt. I am the chief executive of a special operations division of MI6, and your uncle was, for want of a better word, a spy." Alex couldn't help smiling. "You mean like James Bond?" "Similar, although we don't go in for numbers, 00 and the rest of all that. Your uncle was a field agent, highly trained, and very courageous. He successfully completed assignments in Iran, Washington, Hong Kong, and Havana, to name but a few. I imagine this must come as a bit of a shock to you." Alex thought about the dead man, that he had known, what he had known of him, his privacy, his long absences abroad, and the times that he had come home injured. A bandaged arm one time, a bruised face another. Little accidents, Alex had been told. But now it all made sense. "I'm not shocked," he said. Blunt cut a slice off of his meat. "He and Ryder's luck ran out on his last mission," he went on. "He had been working undercover here in England, in Cornwall, and was driving back to London to make a report when he was killed. You saw his car at the yard." "Stryker and Son," Alex muttered. "Who are they?" "Oh, just people we use. We have budget restraints. We have to contract some of our work out, so we hired them to clean things up. Mrs. Jones here is our head of operations. It was she who gave your uncle his last assignment." "We're very sorry to have lost him, Alex." The woman spoke for the first time. She didn't sound very sorry at all. "Do you know who killed him?" "Yes." "Are you going to tell me?" "No, not just now." "Why not?" "Because you don't need to know. Not at this stage." "All right." Alex considered what he did know. "My uncle is a spy, and thanks to you, he's dead. I found out too much, so you knocked me out, and you brought me here. Where am I, by the way?" "This is one of our training centers," Mrs. Jones said. "You've brought me here because you didn't want to tell me... You didn't want me to tell anyone what I know. Is that what this is all about? Because if it is, I'll sign the Official Secrets Act or whatever it is you want me to do. But then I'd like to go home. This is all crazy anyway, and I've had enough. I'm out of here." Blunt coughed quietly. "It's not quite as easy as all that," he said. "Why not?" "It's certainly true that you did draw attention to yourself, both at the junkyard and then at our offices on Liverpool Street. And it's also true that what you know and what I'm going to tell you must go no further. But the fact of the matter is, Alex, we need your help." "My help?" "Yes." He paused. "Have you heard of a man named Herod Sale?" Alex thought for a moment. "I think I've seen his name in the newspapers. He's something to do with computers, and he owns racehorses? Doesn't he come from somewhere in Egypt?" "Yes, from Cairo." Blunt took a sip of wine. "Let me tell you his story, Alex, and I'm sure you'll find it of interest. Herod Sale was born in complete poverty in the back streets of Cairo. His father was a failed oral hygienist, and his mother took in washing. He had 9 brothers, 4 sisters, all living together in 3 small rooms along with the family goat. Young Herod never went to school, and he should have ended up unemployed, unable to read or write, like the rest of them. But when he was 7, something occurred that changed his life. He was walking down Fez Street in the middle of Cairo when he happened to see an upright piano fall out of a 14th-story window. Apparently, it was being moved, and it somehow overturned. Anyway, there was a couple of English tourists walking down the pavement underneath, and they would have been crushed, no doubt about it, except at the last minute, Herod threw himself at them and pushed them out of the way. The piano missed them by an inch. And of course, the tourists were enormously grateful to the young Egyptian waif, and it now turned out that they were very rich. They made inquiries about him and discovered how poor he was. The very clothes he had been wearing had been passed down by all 9 of his brothers. So, out of gratitude, they more or less adopted him. Flew him out of Cairo and put him into a school over here, where he made astonishing progress. He got excellent exam results, and here's an amazing coincidence. At the age of 15, he actually found himself sitting next to a boy who would grow up to become Prime Minister of Great Britain. Our present Prime Minister, in fact. The 2 of them were at school together. I'll move quickly forward. After school, Sale went to Cambridge, where he got a degree in economics. He then set out on a career that went from success to success. He owned radio stations, computer software, and yes, he even found time to buy a string of racehorses, although I believe that they seldom win. But what drew him to our attention was the most recent invention, a quite revolutionary computer he likes to call Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker. Alex remembered the file that he had found in Ian Ryder's office. Things were beginning to come together. The Stormbreaker is being manufactured by Sale Enterprises, Mrs. Jones said. There's been a lot of talk about the design. It has a black keyboard and black casing, with a lightning bolt down the side, Alex said. He'd seen a picture of it in PC Review. It doesn't only look different, Blunt cut in. It's based on a completely new technology, and it uses something called the round processor. I don't suppose that will mean anything to you. It's an integrated circuit of a sphere of silicon about 1 millimeter in diameter, Alex said. It's 90% cheaper to produce than an ordinary chip because the whole thing is sealed in, so you don't need clean rooms for production. Yes. Blunt coughed. I'm surprised you know so much about it. Must be my age, Alex said. Well, Blunt continued, the point is, later today, Sale Enterprises are going to make a quite remarkable announcement. They are planning to give away tens of thousands of these computers. In fact, it is their intention to ensure that every secondary school in England gets its own Stormbreaker. It's an unparalleled act of generosity, and Sale's way of thanking the country that gave him a home. So, the man's a hero. So it would seem. He wrote to Downing Street a few months ago, My dear Prime Minister, you may remember me from our school days together. For almost 40 years I've lived in England, and I wish to make a gesture, something that will never be forgotten, to express my true feelings towards our country. The letter went on to describe the gift and signed, Yours humbly, by the man himself. Of course, the whole government was excited. The computers were being assembled at the Sale plant down in Port Talon, in Cornwall. They'll be shipped across the country, but at the end of this month, and on April 1st there's to be a special ceremony at the Science Museum in London. The Prime Minister is going to press the button that will bring all the computers online, the whole lot of them. And this is top secret, by the way. Mr. Sale will be rewarded with British citizenship, which is something he has apparently always wanted. Well, I'm very happy for him, Alex said, but you still haven't told me what it is that's got to do with me. Blunt glanced at Mrs. Jones, who had finished her meal while he was talking. She unwrapped another peppermint and took over. For some time now, this department, Special Operations, has been concerned about Mr. Sale. The fact of the matter is, we've been wondering if he isn't too good to be true. I won't go into details, Alex, but we've been looking into his business dealings. He has contracts in China, the former Soviet Union, countries that have never been our friends. The government may think that he's a saint, but there's a ruthless side to him too. And the security arrangements down at Port Talon worry us. He's more or less formed his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Not that anyone will listen to us, Blunt muttered. Exactly. The government's too keen to get their hands on the computers to listen to us. That's why we decided to send our own man down to the plant, supposedly to check on security, but in fact, his job was to keep an eye on Herod Sale. You're talking about my uncle, Alex said. Ian Ryder had told him he was going to an insurance convention. Another lie in a life that had been nothing but lies. Yes, he was there for 3 weeks, and, like us, he didn't exactly take to Mr. Sale. In his first reports, he described him as short-tempered and unpleasant. But at the same time, he had to admit everything seemed to be fine. Production was on schedule, the Stormbreakers were coming off the line, and everyone seemed to be happy. But then we got a message. Ryder couldn't say very much because it was an open line, but he told us that something had happened. He said he'd discovered something, that the Stormbreakers mustn't leave the plant, and that he was coming up to London at once. He left Port Talon at 4 o'clock, and he never even got to the freeway. He was ambushed in a quiet country lane. The local police found the car, and we arranged for it to be brought up here. Alex sat in silence. He could imagine it. A twisting lane, with the trees just in blossom. The silver BMW gleamed as it raced past, and around a corner, a second car was waiting. Why are you telling me all this? He asked. It proves what we're saying, Blunt replied. We have our doubts about Sale, so we send a man down, our best man. He finds out something, and he ends up dead. Maybe Ryder discovered the truth. But I don't understand, Alex interrupted. Sale is giving away computers. He's not making any money out of them, and in return he's getting a medal and British citizenship. Fine, what's he got to hide? We don't know, Blunt said. We just don't know, but we want to find out, and soon, before these computers leave the plant. They're being shipped out on March 31st, Mrs. Jones added. Only 3 weeks from now. She glanced at Blunt, and he nodded. That's why it's essential for us to send someone else to Port Talon. Someone to continue where your uncle left off. Alex smiled queasily. I hope you're not looking at me. We can't just send in another agent, Mrs. Jones said. The enemy has shown his hand. He's killed Ryder. He'll be expecting a replacement. Somehow we have to trick him. We have to send someone in who won't be noticed, Blunt continued. Someone who can look around and report back without being seen. We were considering sending down a woman. She might be able to slip in as a cleaner or a helper. But then I got a better idea. A few months ago, one of the computer images One of the computer magazines wrote and ran a competition. Be the first boy or girl to use the Stormbreaker. Travel to Port Talon and meet Herod Sale himself. That was the first prize, and it was won by some young chap who's apparently a bit of a whiz kid when it comes to computers. Name of Felix Lester, 14 years old. Same age as yourself. He looks a bit like you, too. He's expected down at Port Talon 2 weeks from now. Wait a minute. You've already shown yourself to be extraordinary brave and resourceful, Blunt said. First at the junkyard. That was a karate kick, wasn't it? How long have you been learning karate? Alex didn't answer, so Blunt went on. And then there's that little test we arranged for you at the bank. Any boy who could climb out of a 15th floor window just to satisfy his own curiosity has to be rather special. And it seems to me that you are very special indeed. What we're suggesting is that you come and work for us, Mrs. Jones said. We have enough time to give you some basic training, not that you'll probably need it, and we can equip you with a few items that may help you with what we have in mind. Then we'll arrange for you to take the place of this other boy, and we'll pack him off to Florida or somewhere. Give him a holiday as a consolation prize. You'll go to Sale Enterprises on March 29th. That's when the Lester boy is expected. You'll stay there until April 1st, which is the day of the ceremony. The timing couldn't be better. You'll be able to meet Herod Sale, keep an eye on him, and tell us what you think. Perhaps you'll also find out what it was that your uncle discovered and why he had to die for it. You shouldn't be in any danger, and after all, who would suspect a 14-year-old boy of being a spy? All we're asking you to do is report back to us, Blunt said. April 1st is just 3 weeks from now. That's all we're asking. 3 weeks of your time. A chance to make sure these computers are everything they're cracked up to be. A chance to serve your country. Blunt had finished his lunch, his plate completely clean, as if there'd never been any food on it at all. He put down his knife and fork, laying them precisely side by side. All right, Alex, he said. So, what do you say? There was a long pause. Alex put down his knife and fork. He hadn't eaten anything. Blunt was watching him with polite interest, and Mrs. Jones was unwrapping yet another peppermint, her black eyes seemingly fixed on the twist of paper in her hands. No, Alex said. I'm sorry? It's a dumb idea. I don't want to be a spy. I want to play soccer. Anyway, I have a life of my own. He found it difficult to choose the right words. The whole thing was so preposterous that he almost wanted to laugh. Why don't you ask this Felix Lester to snoop around for you? We don't believe he'd be as resourceful as you, Blunt said. He's probably better at computer games. Alex shook his head. I'm sorry. I'm just not interested. I don't want to get involved. That's a pity, Blunt said. His tone of voice hadn't changed, but there was a heavy, dead quality to the words, and there was something different about him. Throughout the meal, he'd been polite, not friendly, but at least human. In an instant, that had disappeared. Alex thought of a toilet chain being pulled. The human part of him had just flushed away. We'd better move on, then, to discuss your future, he continued. Like it or not, Alex, the Royal in General is now your legal guardian. I thought you said the Royal in General didn't exist. Blunt ignored him. Ian Ryder has, of course, left the house and all of his money to you. However, he left it in a trust until you're 21, and we control that trust. So there will, I'm afraid, have to be some changes. The American girl who lives with you? Jack? Miss Starbright. Her visa has expired, and she'll be returned to America. We propose to put the house on the market, and fortunately you have no relatives who would be prepared to look after you, so I'm afraid that also means you'll have to leave Brooklyn. You'll be sent to an institution. There's one I know about just outside Birmingham. The St. Elizabeth in Sowerbridge. No, not a very pleasant place, but I'm afraid there's no alternative. You're blackmailing me, Alex exclaimed. Not at all. But have I agreed to do what you asked? Blunt glanced at Mrs. Jones. Help us, and we'll help you, she said. Alex considered, but not for very long. He had no choice, and he knew it. Not when these people controlled his money, his present life, his entire future. You talked about training, he said. Mrs. Jones nodded. Felix Lester is expected at Port Talon in 2 weeks, she said. That doesn't give us very much time, but it's also why we brought you here, Alex. This is a training center. If you agree to what we want, we can start at once. Start at once. Alex spoke these 3 words without liking the sound of them. Alex and Mrs. Jones were waiting for his answer. He sighed. Yeah, all right. It doesn't look like I have very much of a choice. He glanced at the slices of cold lamb on his plate. Dead meat. Suddenly, he knew how it felt. And that is the end of chapter 4, folks. There it is. Those are the first 4 chapters of Stormbreaker. How we feeling? How we doing? Oh, yes, water. Turn that up a little bit. And that's where we're going to stop for the reading today. I'm happy that we got 4 chapters in. I think let me see how many chapters are in this book total. There are 17. So it should divvy up quite nicely over the next month or so. So the way I'm thinking this is going to happen is every Monday at noon, I will go ahead and read several chapters of this book until we finish it, and at the end, I'll probably hold some sort of analysis or discussion. We can, if you'd like to suggest questions for everyone to think about and answer to kind of spur discussion, you can go ahead and drop those in the Discord. I will drop the link to that in just a second. There's a whole channel dedicated to book club. So if you'd like to chat about the books or ask questions there or recommend books for future, in the future, you can go ahead and do that. A couple of things before I send y'all on a raid. Let's see. Some thank yous are in order. We have Glizzy Gamer, The Spillin', Nalan Ven, Sheep Lattes, Sakaru, Jacob Judge. Thank you for the follows. Also, let me just scroll up a little bit. Evictim, Lazy Bork, thank you for the follows. Terrible Gamer, thank you for subscribing for the 2nd month. I appreciate you, friend. Keywork26, thank you for the follow. And thank you for all the hydration and stretch reminders. I appreciate it so much. I am going to send you on a raid shortly. I'm gonna have some lunch, talk with my grandparents, drink some water, give my throat a little rest. Tomorrow, I will be playing D&D with my group. At some point soon here, we're going to start live streaming our games. I don't have an exact date yet, but I will keep you guys updated, and I'll let you know our schedule for that. I think it's going to be every Tuesday, and I'm super excited. I can't wait to to tell this story with these amazing people and share that with you all. It's my first time playing D&D, it's my first campaign, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my character Rowan. And yeah, so Tuesday no stream, Wednesday and Thursday at noon I will be doing some more Dragon Age Inquisition, and Friday and Saturday I will at noon Pacific Standard Time I will be continuing my playthrough of Little Nightmares. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, be sure to drop the follow and click the bell for notifications of when I go live, or you can follow me on Twitter. I usually post just before I go live, and my stream schedule for the week is up there too, in case you're interested. Oh my goodness, so much. Thank you all for being here. This was my first reading stream, and I'm so grateful that you all came out to support. Let me see who is online right now that we can raid and send our cozy vibes over to. Don't mind me, I'm just scrolling to the bottom of my Who's Live thing. Let's see. Who can we raid? Let's see. I just want to make sure that that this person is not about to end stream or anything like that. And I will send you over to them as soon as I know that they're going to keep streaming for a while. Okay, so I think we are going to go raid Usagi Yokai. They are a VTuber, and right now they're doing an art stream, which could be super fun to go hang out in. So, again, thank you all for being here. I super appreciate you being here with me today. Yes, Dragon Age tomorrow. Let's go say hi to Usagi and see what they're doing for art. If you would like to copy and paste our raid message, feel free to do so. And in just a second, I will go ahead and send us over there. In the meantime, remember to stay hydrated, wear a mask, wash your hands, take care of each other. I love you all, and I will see you soon. Don't forget to drink water because it's good for your body. Okay, bye.